Hello, and welcome to the Green Room podcast. I'm your host, Garen Green, and I'm glad that you are here. And before we dive in, I want to share a brief word of caution. In the Green Room, we do not shy away from the raw truth. This episode contains a deep discussion about suicide, substance misuse, and intense personal grief. These are lived experiences and real stories. Sharing them is part of the healing process, but I know that they may be difficult to hear for some. If you are currently in a place where this contact feels heavy, please take care of yourself. Breathe, pause, and come back later if you need to. And you are not alone. So now let's begin. So welcome to the Green Room podcast. I'm your host, Garen Green, and today I've got the amazing guest today, Lee Martin. And Lee is the founder of There Is Light Therapy, an integrated counselling practice supporting men with anxiety, depression, OCD, and baby loss. And his journey into therapy began while working in drug and alcohol recovery. In that environment, he witnessed the compassion and skills of counsellors, helping people navigate profound change, and something about that which stayed with Lee. It planted a seed. Lee began his counselling training in 2017 and has been practicing professionally since 2021. He works integratively with men, drawing on counselling, CBT, and EMDR. He is particularly passionate about supporting men and through baby loss, an area he believes is still too often overlooked. Lee brings both professional training and lived experience into his work. Having experienced OCD from childhood and the later loss of his baby son, Ray, he understands deeply how isolating these experiences can be, especially for men who struggle to speak openly or feel unsure about therapy. There Is a Light is named after the first song Lee listened to following Ray's passing. The name reflects his belief that no matter how dark life can feel, there is always some light somewhere. Lee holds a diploma in personal centered counselling and a postgrad certificate in CBT, and Lee has also completed his EMDR European training. While he values all these approaches, he becomes increasingly drawn to the depth and effectiveness of the EMDR, particularly in trauma work. His therapeutic style is warm, grounded, and trauma-informed. He works at his clients' pace, never pushing them to share more than they're ready for feeling, and believes meaningful change happens when people feel safe, understood, and gently supported towards what they want to change. So, Lee, welcome to the Green Room podcast, and thank you so much for giving your Sunday up for some time here with myself. And Lee, before we get into things, how are you feeling professionally and personally, and what helps you feel grounded before a conversation like this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to come and talk to you. Um, Personally, feeling pretty good. Football team won yesterday, which is always a good little boost to the ego and the self-esteem and the happiness
Good, that's a good sign.
neurons. Yeah, it's pretty good. Professionally, yeah, things are going really well. Doing some really great work with people.
Excellent.
Business is going well and stuff, so that's absolutely fantastic.
Ah, brilliant. So
Um,
we've got a buzzing therapist whose football team have done well, and he's in a good space. So
yeah,
that's great to
absolutely.
hear. So in regards to obviously in regards to like your work, which as we know are primarily with men, and what stops men? I've got a few questions here for you. So
Mhm.
what stops men from reaching out? What beliefs about masculinity do men often bring into therapy? And how does silence usually show up when men are struggling?
So I think, in terms of what stops men coming for therapy or reaching out is that it's kind of, number one, it can be something that's new and scary and it's out of their comfort zone. they can think it's something that's kind of weak, that actually it shows they're not coping. And by going to have to get some support from someone, it shows that, intrinsically they're weak and they're not as strong as they want to be.
Mhm.
And I think it's the culture in which people grow up in as well. They've probably, seen historically men being sort of strong and silent and not saying a lot, but internally struggling. Um, and it could just, all of those things I think can make it quite difficult to come forward. And I also think that the idea of putting themselves first, they sometimes think, well, actually, it's going to cost me money maybe to go for therapy, and I don't want
Mhm.
to spend that money. I should be spending it here or
Mhm.
whatever. When actually, by going for therapy, it's like you can obviously offload and recharge, and then be that, better or, stronger person for your family because you've dealt with those issues away from
Mhm.
the family unit. Um, so yeah, that's probably what I would say about that.
Mm. Well, thanks for that insight there. And just out of interest, with your caseload, would you say it's more male dominated nowadays, or is it kind of balanced out between male and females?
My caseload is 95% men. So I've got, I do specifically advertise as a male therapist, but I still, for whatever reason, some women will sort of read my profile or see my picture and they'll sort of be like, oh, I felt a real resonance. Would you be prepared to
Mm.
work with me? Which, absolutely, if they feel that could be a good thing for them, then.
That's really insights like what we discussed earlier before the podcast. I myself
Mm.
went from probably 95% females when I first started practicing. Now it's took hell of a transformation. I'm probably 95% males as well. So
Yes, yeah.
one for the boys. So we're heading
Yeah,
in the right direction.
yeah.
And we could have so much more. So that's really interesting. Another male therapist in that very, similar direction in therapy. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. I really
It's okay.
appreciate that. So obviously you mentioned with some of your story, your lived experience from childhood.
Hmm.
How did that shape how you understand, fear and those intrusive thoughts? And why is psychoeducation so important for men dealing with intrusive thoughts? And when you tell a client, your thoughts make sense, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. I think, if you've grown up with OCD from being a child and you've grown up with intrusive thoughts from being a child, it's really hard to know that there's a life outside that and that actually other people don't live that. It can be
Mhm.
quite a, when you gain that perspective that actually that is not the way everybody thinks or their brain functions, it's quite interesting. But I think from an early age, it teaches you that your thoughts are scary and that actually it can feel very much like your thoughts are very true and very rigid.
Mm.
And that if you don't act in a certain way, or do a certain thing, that those intrusive thoughts can come true, which is obviously, quite a terrifying thing to go through, especially as a child. Um, so I think absolutely psychoeducation is so important because, and this is one of my worries about OCD, is that there's probably so many people out there suffering in silence that, they're having thoughts about, hurting people or hurting their children or things like that that are absolutely terrifying to them. And they're thinking that it reflects a reflection of them as a person and that they're a bad person and that they're horrible. And when you can present that psychoeducation to somebody and go, no, 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 this is the reason you're having these thoughts is because, it's the exact opposite of who you are. And that is what OCD thoughts latch onto. So it's like, if you care deeply about children, you will probably have intrusive thoughts about hurting a child. If you're really religious and passionate about your religion, whether it's Christianity and God, you will have blasphemous,
Mhm.
intense thoughts. And that's kind of why they make sense because it's so scary and it is so scary because it's the complete opposite of who you are and your values and beliefs. And to just know that sometimes can just break that cycle or break that wall down, and for people to know that they're not bad and that they don't have control over what they think, it just pops, it just pops into your
Mhm.
head. It can be so liberating, I think. And is that, I don't know if you've seen that story in the news this week. There's this poor lady who I didn't read the whole story, but essentially she thought she was a paedophile for 2 years. She was having these horrible intrusive thoughts. She's suffering in silence.
Mm.
And then of course she goes to the doctors and the doctor's like, oh, this is OCD. It's not. It's because, you care about children and it's because
Yeah.
you're going through a difficult time. And straight away, this kind of relief that came over.
Mm,
It's so important. And of course, in society, we watch films, we watch telly, and it's OCD. Oh, you wash your hands a bit too much, or
mhm.
you put things in a certain order on a shelf, and it's like that is just such, in some ways, such a minimizing of OCD.
Sure. And I can only imagine feeling kind of stuck in that way and want to be able to share where you are. We can
Hmm.
kind of have a look at how people are going to look at us as a person. Like you said, with people, reflecting on harming children, like the lady you spoke in the news, I'd read part of it, funny enough, and it was really interesting. And that
Mm,
massive amount of relief for well knowing what she had with her diagnosis. But walking around for all these years not wanting to share with anybody. So I can only,
absolutely.
as a therapist myself, I can only imagine what that's like for somebody, and obviously with yourself from childhood to where you had to come to today and be able to work through that. And yeah,
Yeah.
I can only imagine what how difficult it is can be for you guys, and even to this day, like what I say to my clients is, it's all about how you use the tools the best you can, and it's maintaining that. And we will go back to our old ways sometimes. And us as therapists, as I'm sure you know, we're not perfect. If there's any therapist out there who says, "Well, yeah, everything's perfect and baseline and everything's fine in my world," it's like, well, I want to know, where you get that knowledge from because I want some of that. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can only imagine, and obviously as a childhood, your upbringing, that's obviously really helped you kind of project into the therapist who you are today. So, yeah, hell of a lot of insight there for you and
Yeah,
transferable skills.
yeah, yeah. And what I would say is, people who are thinking, they might be having these difficult thoughts or these compulsions that they're having to act out, is if they decide to go for therapy or to talk to their doctor or whatever, do make sure the person has experience in OCD, because it can be, when you're trusting people with those innermost kind of dark thoughts, and it's really important they have an understanding of intrusive thoughts and what they are. Because I've heard in the past, people have not really understood, and there's maybe been safeguarding things raised, or so it's really important you feel safe with that person. They do truly understand that, intrusive thoughts and OCD.
Brilliant. I'm really glad you made that aware, Lee, as well, because as you know, if there's people who are not experienced to work with people, this the amount of damage which can
Yeah,
cause to that client is, and as we know, we do hear that unfortunately in therapy and this, therapists out there, know your limits and,
absolutely.
speak
Yeah,
to somebody
absolutely.
like Lee who is trained to be able to work with people. This is his area. So thank you so much for highlighting that, Lee. And in regards to obviously with your journey,
Hmm.
and again, we'll take our time with this as we've spoken. I said to you about me having a lump in the throat moment, and like I say, this is
Ah,
about
yeah.
you. So, in regards to your loss and in regards to baby loss and male grief, why do you think baby loss is still so hard for men to talk about? And what grief do men feel they're not allowed to be able to show? And what do men need most after this loss, but rarely receive that?
Yeah, I think, it's obviously a very, very difficult thing to talk about. And I think that inevitably, a lot of the focus and attention falls on the partner or the female. They've grown the baby, they've given birth to the baby, and there's such a, in my experience, there's such a different link to the child.
Mhm.
It's so embodied with a
Mhm.
female. So of course, lots of the attention goes on to them. And I think sometimes men can feel quite selfish, that actually there can be this feeling, I need to be there, I need to support my family, I need to hold it all together. I can't show emotion and I can't show weakness for being upset by this. I've got to be the strong one. Um, which is just, it's just not true. It's like, it is such a difficult thing to go through, that of course it's great if you've got somebody that you can talk to and you can be open with, and especially if that's your partner, you're going through such a difficult thing together, and to be able to be open and not have to be cut off and closed off to them, and be able to share the difficulties that you're having with the difficulties that they're having, it can draw a real closeness, I think.
Sure. And again, this is kind of getting to the core of this, as I know, when it comes to as therapists, is sharing some of your raw story. And if you don't mind me asking, how did your own experience change the way you sit with men, with this pain?
Yeah, I think I mean, number one, it's made me very, I guess, in a way, very comfortable with it. Whereas when I did my training, I'd sit in a room with a couple of wonderful women who'd lost babies, had
Wow.
stillbirths and things, and I'd be thinking, oh my God, that's really intense. That is not an area that I would ever want to work in. It just sounds too emotional. But obviously, having having lived through that incredibly difficult experience, it's made me very, I guess, comfortable the word. Obviously, it's emotional at times, it chokes me up, but I really feel that I can hold that.
Yeah.
It's not something that kind of swamps me or overwhelms me.
Mm.
Just because unfortunately, obviously I'd been great if I'd never had to go through that, but I've acclimatized to it, I feel.
Wow. Wow, thank you. That's really moving right there, Liam. Sorry, as we know, we, get to the root cause of things, in therapy. And thank you so much for explaining that in such a kind of perfect way, really. As again, that many of us
Yeah,
don't want to go through loss and grief, but that lived experience, as we spoke to earlier, can be so beneficial for our work. So,
yeah.
thank you so much for sharing that. And as you know, in the background, if there's any time you have a wild man on man, you can always bend my ear with
Hmm.
stuff,
Oh,
okay?
thank you.
Us guys, and you made valid point about us guys, and as we first got into contact, I presumed straight away, instantly, female therapist with the loss of a child. And
Yes,
it
yeah.
wasn't until we messaged more, and it really knocked me back because I haven't experienced that in life. I've experienced grief, but not children of myself, and I can only imagine what you guys go through on there with that attachment and producing a child. So I'm not gonna lie, that's not my area because I wouldn't know what
Mm,
it's like. But thank you so much for explaining to people of how that's kind of somewhat helped you with your experience to become who you are as a therapist, to be able to
yeah,
let other guys know, as we know, we're very guarded, and we can kind of, to somewhat self-disclosure, that I can feel where you are, and that's where you can meet your clients. I can only imagine with huge compassion, Nelly, and being your
absolutely.
authentic self. I could imagine that being quite powerful. And even myself, as a guy and male of a therapist, I had that presumption. I thought, female therapist who's lost a child. I thought,
Mm,
okay, I don't really know that area, but to some aspect, when I found out you was Maori, I was like, "Oh, that's a bit of relief for me," because, like you said, the child attached to the mum, etc. So when I heard male wise, I was like, "Oh my god!" I thought this is new to me. So again, thank you for giving me that insight, and yeah, I can only imagine how compassionate you'll be with males and letting them know that
yeah,
I've got that lived experience too.
yeah. And I think with, like we said, with the OCD, it's about that normalization of the experience. I think that, I don't know about, obviously not every man, but for a lot of men, that can be the first major grief that they've gone through, and
Yeah,
to know that, there's those commonalities that, one, your sleep is going to be really affected. Two, you're
definitely.
going to be very, very sad and depressed. And three, and I'm sure you probably experienced this with grief, it can feel like you've got a brain injury at times. The recall and the trying to
Yeah,
think and be that person that you were and as sharp as you were is just gone,
yeah.
and it can take a long time to
Ah,
come back. And obviously, at the start, you and your partner can be on the same page, but what I tend to see is that men grieve quite differently to women at times and at different speeds. And, you can then end up in this kind of alien territory where the relationship that you had is very suddenly feeling quite different, in a difficult way, which obviously can come back and does come back in most cases, but it could be quite a lonely and isolating place to be,
mm.
at times.
Wow. Thanks for giving that insight. And it's very interesting how you're saying about grief affecting males and females slightly differently there. So that's very interesting. And as we know with guys, again, I'm not saying I'm 100% right here, but guys do close down so much where reaching
Yeah,
out, I think we've started to highlight it more. As we know, we've got years to come before males open up. And in regards to grief and, suicide rates, which we have with males, we so shut ourselves down. And what I've learned, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, it's like we go into that scared, and I've shared this with some of my sessions with males where I said it's kind of like they go into that young boy who's scared, and the
Yeah.
amount of guys who have opened up to me, and it really, I'm sure you've had this where it really knocks me back because we've been in similar circumstances in life, but when you do open up, I remember when I first went to therapy many years back, when I went to my dark place, and I'm not gonna lie, typical male, I had a young female therapist walk out, open the door. In my head, excuse the French, what the fuck's she gonna do for me?
Yeah.
Had that
Yeah.
guard up straight away. But when you do see a guy eventually release that, and many guys, when it comes to relationships, grief, anxiety, depression, and what they go through, when it gets to the ball part of it, they say to me, "Look, I'm fucking scared. I'm really, really frightened." And do you know what? When a guy does
Yeah.
that, I'm not sure about you, it really makes me melt, and I'll jump in front of a train for my clients. I
Oh,
go
yeah.
into that mode, people saving. So it's such a brave move that guys can do that. So, thanks for kind of shedding some light on that for us. I really appreciate it. And again, we're talking about shedding light. So there is light. The name, There is Light Therapy, comes from a powerful moment. And
Mm.
again, these firing these questions out to you. What does that light mean to you? And how do you help people hold hope without just dismissing their pain? And what does light look like when someone is, still deep within that darkness, if you like?
Yeah. I think it's, obviously, like we said about the song, for me, it was, driving back from the hospital. My son's just died, and it was that, it just enabled me to sort of just let it all out, cry and, let those tears out, which is obviously such an important thing to be able to do, to touch that grief. But,
Yeah.
there's the line in it, there is a light and it never goes out. And I think, no matter how dark things are, and, talk about this in depression a lot, we can feel as though we're stuck at the bottom of that well and that there is no light,
Yeah.
but actually, just because we can't see it at the moment, it doesn't mean there isn't something there, in the future. And as difficult as that is to have as a concept when you're in that place,
Yeah.
just knowing that there's a possibility that things could change or that things could get better, I think is just so important, and especially when people have been through things before, and you obviously talk about the past with people quite a bit, and relating it to another time when maybe they felt like that, actually, that there was no way out, or things weren't gonna get better, that actually, by sticking here, by talking to somebody, by a friend inviting them out for coffee, things can very, very slowly start to change,
Yeah.
and it's just, like I say, it's just knowing that there is a light, at the end. I guess it's that quantifiable thing. There's a light at the end of the tunnel most of the time, and even if you can't see it, it can be there.
Mm. I love that, and even looking at your website, I was kind of questioning my own because I've used my name, if you like, and when I saw yours, I thought, "Oh, he's done what I should have done."
No,
Really
no.
powerful and moving, especially with what journey you've been through, your personal journey, and how that does shed light into that. So I found it really clever what you done with your website. I thought, "Oh my God,
Oh, thank you.
you hit that area which I didn't cover." So now I'm set in stone with mine now, and I'm like, "Oh, just keep it as it is." So yeah, really powerful. Obviously, with your website, it shows that story you've been through, and it's so
Yeah,
authentic. So that's really, really amazing. I must admit, I do like your website.
thanks.
So, in regards to obviously EMDR, which you trained
Mm,
in, and again off the show, I'd definitely love to be able to pick your brain about that at some time. And so EMDR, and because again, I was trained in DBT myself many years back, and that's like kind of seemed to be coming in a lot more. But even working with the NHS and even private practice, there's so much EDMR coming out now in regards to trauma
yeah.
work. And like I said, that's definitely not my area. You're the expert here. So what drew you more deeply towards EMDR, and why is safety so important, as we discussed earlier
Mhm.
about trauma work and capabilities of therapists out there? And how do you work at a client's pace without pushing them before they're ready?
Yeah. I think, I mean, if we go back to the rehab, when I worked in the rehab, we drove from Cornwall up to Plymouth to visit another rehab up there, seeing how they were doing things. And I was sat in the car with two therapists, and this is before I'd even started any counselling training. And we was just starting to talk about counselling and
Hmm.
might do a level 2, blah, blah, blah. And then they started talking about EMDR. They're like, oh, keep hearing about this weird therapy where, people are really traumatized, but they sort of then, do something, they start to move their eyes and it heals
Hmm.
trauma. And I remember that sticking with me. That sounds a bit weird. And I think that's one of the key things with EMDR, and that's how you generally know it's working with somebody when they've brought up a trauma, you're doing whether it's eye movements. I think this is one of the common things. It's called EMDR, but actually it's about bilateral stimulation. So it can be eye movements, moving from side to side, vibrations
Wow.
in hands. It can be all sorts of things. But when when it starts to work with a client, that's weird. And it's such a weird modality, but it's so
Mm.
powerful.
That's right.
Um, and
Sorry, go on. Sorry.
well, what I was going to say is that, with counseling, sometimes, I think, we sit and we discuss and we talk and we try and bring awareness, but when there's a trauma there and there's something that's stuck,
Yeah.
we don't always have the ability to shift that trauma.
Yeah.
And it's, with EMDR, it is literally, we've hit up on something here and it doesn't feel like it's going to shift. And,
Hmm.
we come from a place that, trauma, it's stored in the body as much as it is in the mind. And with counseling, we can be, we're dealing with the mind a lot of the
Yeah.
time.
Hmm.
And so with EMDR, we bring up this kind of image that represents the most difficult part of the trauma. We bring up a belief that we have a negative belief that we have about ourselves in relation to that trauma, such as, it's my fault, whatever it was that happened. We look at where we locate that in the body, where do we feel it, what emotions are coming up, and then we just very simply sort of say, go with that. And we start bilateral stimulation, and then, you know, we're getting people to then look at themselves in no judgment. So whatever comes up for them, bodily sensations, images, thoughts, they just feed it back to us and okay, let's go with that. And through this kind of repetition and this sense of like non-judgment and acceptance within themselves, we seem to move to a place of healing where things just get released from the body, things get released from the mind, and people just, and you can almost see it work in real time sometimes,
Wow.
and that's what really draws me to it. It's like, I feel like in a session I can see people heal, um, which is an incredible thing. We come to the helping profession because we get something out of it, and
Yeah.
having that ability to help people heal and see it is,
Mm.
it's a very, very rewarding thing.
Sure, it's really powerful, isn't it, when you see that shift? And it's really interesting what you said about your insight when you're considering about doing your level 2 and
Mm.
reflecting back on where I was. I went in the similar field to yourself with drug and alcohol, and because I had so much loss of my friends through either overdoses or suicide, and even with myself, I tried antidepressants. They didn't work for me. I beat my 15-year cocaine addiction, but in my mindset, it makes you realize again, being surrounded by therapists. I remember being took aside and the guy saying to me, I could imagine you'll be quite compassionate as therapists. You got to remember, Garen, you're level 2. You've got a lot to learn. Just one thing you got to remember, you will not save everyone in this room. And it's for
Yeah,
me at
yeah.
that time that left a bad taste in my throat. And the therapist, Nick, was amazing. He was one of the tutors at one of the colleges. And at first I found it quite offensive, but then when I reflected back on that over time, I thought, oh my God, he's so right. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting. And like what you said with the EDMR things where eye move and all that, when it first came in, I was like, oh, that sounds a bit weird. But I'm
Mm,
fascinated, especially what you said just there about the vibration of people. I love anything like that because with my sound
mm.
engineering degree, we're looking at frequencies and I'm like, oh, so you might have drawn me in there a bit as well. And like what you said in regards to trauma, I work with people who do have various things from addictions, anxiety, depression, and grief. And again, I always have that. Not, I always got to kind of watch myself when it comes to trauma work because I always say to people that I'm trauma informed, I'm not trauma trained. And if there is anybody now, I do know an EMDR therapist. So if I do get stuck with that, obviously I'll be looking at referrals for
Oh,
yourself.
wonderful.
But when I get near that instantly, I do think now EMDR because you hear so much about it. And it's like, look, the last thing I want to do, like we said with certain therapy, I'm behavior, I'm about how their thought processes. But with you guys, from what it sounds like, you can get to the core a little bit more deeper than counseling, and hopefully
Yeah.
give them a chance to make that shift. So that's such a valid point of what you say. That's made me really reflect a lot with some of my clients where there is, minimal trauma there, if you like. But when it comes to the point of what you deal with up here, I'm very arm's length of that, because the last thing, you highlighted it massively. If you're not trained in this area, don't play with people's lives, because you can cause so much
Yeah.
damage.
Yeah.
So very interesting, like you said, with the eye movement and, oh God, EMDR sounds really weird. I had the same view on that years back. So it's kind
Yeah.
of, and now I'm speaking to somebody trained in it who's giving me some more insight. But like I said, I'd definitely love to keep in contact and pick your brain more about that side, especially from a male perspective, because finally us
Yeah.
guys are catching up. There's more coming into the field. So, yeah, the boys are back in town, so to speak.
Yeah. There is like with the bilateral stimulations, or some people do use sound, so it's like sound from ear to ear to do the bilateral stimulation. There's a lady actually who's published a paper last year doing some training on using music within EMDR therapy, which I
Oh,
haven't done the
fascinating.
training yet, but it sounds really fascinating as to how how that could work and how it could increase success rates and things like that.
Oh, brilliant. I definitely will be picking your brain on that. That's
Mm.
yeah, that's given me a whole new insight of EMDR. And in regards to kind of, obviously, again, kind of having a look at, obviously, with your website, because it's here about promoting your story and what you do within your work. So how can the listeners get hold of yourself, Lee, if they want to pick your brain in regards to your practice in EMDR?
Yeah, if they just go on to obviously my website, it's www dot enough W's www.thereisalighttherapy.co.uk, and there's just options on there to message me. And obviously, there's kind of some of my story on there. There's lots of different blogs about sort of baby loss and male grief and
Well,
trauma and all sorts of bits and pieces that
ah,
can be useful to read.
excellent. So if you do, if you've heard that, listeners out there, please do get in contact, especially males. We've got no issues here in regards to any other genders here, but this is Lee's area. So if you do find that you're that guy who's trapped and you have no idea how to break that cycle where you are, please reach out to the likes of Lee. And I will make sure his websites are advertised as well with all the information, so you can get hold of him through his
Wonderful.
website. And again, kind of coming to that stage of kind of when we're kind of coming towards the ending of our journey, and I'd love to speak to you for hours on end, especially with the EMDR. And as you know, you got to know me in a short time. I bloody talk too much, Lee. So again, just kind of getting to that point of kind of these questions. So kind of closing reflections, as I'd say. So big questions for yourself here, Lee. And what does healthy masculinity mean to you? Also, as well, what would you say to a man currently listening who's really unsure about therapy? And also, as well, what's one thing you wish men understood about themselves?
Yeah. So in terms of the first question, sort of healthy masculinity, I would say it's the opposite of what we've seen recently this week on the new Louis Theroux documentary.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about self-centeredness, it's not about narcissism, it's not about taking from people what you can get and laying the law down, to
Mm-hmm.
everybody that you meet. I think it's about, emotional honesty, vulnerability, and having, good relationships with people around you and feeling that you can be open with people and trust them with your stuff. And I
Mm.
think, a lot of the time as men, they feel like they've got to, carry everything alone and, we've got to be strong, I've got to hold this.
Yeah.
And, actually, I have it with guys, they come for therapy after years of feeling like this, and then they feel quite vulnerable, and they're
Yeah.
out with their friends and they're like, oh, I'm having therapy, and straight away, because that person's been vulnerable, I think I've needed some support, I'm having a difficult time with this.
Yeah.
Oh, well, why don't you go for, it's been really good for me. And I think it's that thing,
Brilliant.
as soon as we start talking about it and people just be honest that, things are difficult, life is not a bed of roses, life has a lot of difficulties within it, and by
Mm.
sharing that with other people, I always say I don't think there's any science in it, but a problem shared is a problem halved,
Yeah.
and I think by just being open to people and then having that connection, knowing that they're struggling as well, there can be relief in that, and knowing that people are there to support you in a
Mhm.
professional capacity. It's just such a massive thing.
Yeah. And then he said a really interesting point, isn't it? When guys do open up to one another, it's very interesting how they can plant seeds into other males. And you know yourself as I on that journey, how hard was it for us to open up as males? And even though we had
Absolutely.
kind of awareness, I think that's what's helped us become who we are as therapists to this day. And again, having that brave step to be able to reach out and like instantly, like I said, my guard was seeing a young therapist come out for
Mm,
me. My guard was up straight away. Oh, what's she going to teach me? And I can assure you, I still don't remember that therapist's name to this day, whoever you are, but thank
mm,
you. That really kind of helped me get to me to where I am. So you made really, really valid points there, Lee, especially with guys, especially that guy trapped and scared to reach out. So you can definitely get out of, therapists like Lee here, who's
mhm.
been where you guys are and also had to work very hard to be able to work with his own story to be able to create who he is as a therapist today. So massive, massive insight and loads of knowledge I can see you'll be able to share with your clients. So again, thank you so much, Lee, in regards to your honesty and definitely for the work you do. And like I said, when we first got in contact, my instant reaction was, oh, female therapist, loss of child
Yeah.
instantly. And as soon as I knew you was male, I was like, oh my God, what a powerful podcast this can be. So I really do appreciate your time, especially with the to and fro in. And obviously you wasn't well not so long back. So I was like, please be well.
Yeah.
So I really do feel this will be a very interesting shift for the listeners out there. For one, knowing, us males go through grief, especially in your position as well. And you can meet these clients with compassion. And just speaking to you in a short
Absolutely.
time as we are, I can only imagine, if I do ever get any clients that are into that line of work, I 100% will be throwing them away, Lee, because I can see how authentic and real and genuine are. And as you know, there's good and bad in all industries, as we know, but I really have enjoyed this chat for you. And again, thank you so much for giving up part of your Sunday for this. I am so honored for yourself and all these people who are coming to me with the podcast. So truly thank you to you.
Oh, it's
Because
been a pleasure. Thank you.
this is massive. And God, I even get choked every so often. So thank God for coffee afterwards. So I just want to say, thank you so much for your honesty and 100% with the work you do. And for anybody listening, if this conversation has resonated with you, please know this, that as Lee said earlier, you are not alone, even in the darkest moments. And hence this podcast, there is light. So if you'd like to learn more about Lee, what Lee does within his work, please visit thereislightTherapy.co.uk. There'll be information about Lee and his story within the information on our podcast. So once again, Lee, thank you so much for your story and your time. And I really look forward to keeping in contact with you to see how amazing your work could be going. And I'll be fully supporting you on that with your journey helping males. So thank you so much for giving your time. And is there anything you'd like to say before we slow things down? What you would like to say to people out there in regards to you and your work? Is there a message you'd like to give to people out there, Lee?
Yeah, I think I would just say, if things are difficult and things are hard, just don't suffer in silence. Open up to a friend, book an appointment with your doctor and have a chat. I hear great things about some doctors that will take that extra time
Hmm.
and support you. And just know that sharing this stuff again with a friend, doctor, therapist, that it can be so powerful and it can be so transformative, and say it can change your life for the better, which is what we all want.
Sure. And seeing this person opposite me now, there's a proof in the pudding there, isn't there? From the journey you are to a trained EMDR therapist. So it shows you how powerful and how much us males can grow. So, I mean, well done to you, Lee. And I kind
Thank
of
you.
big thank you again. So I will make sure I get this up and running for you. I'm going to do some editing. So thank you again, Lee, for your time. And a thank you to the listeners out there. I've been your host, Garen Green, at the Green Room podcast. And once again, a big thank you to Lee for joining us within the Green Room. And I'd love to be able to get you back on the show with time to come to see how your practice practice has evolved, I'd love to be able to get you coming in on the future side of things. And I am looking at kind of getting a male discussion at one point with a podcast. And I truly would love you to be involved with that about males and mental health. So I can imagine that would be quite an interesting chat. So I'll be in touch with you about that if you're happy with that.
Brilliant. Yeah, yeah. I'm just finishing a book as well. I've just finishing a book about male, baby loss. It's like personal story with baby loss and grief and sort of my journey and my path to healing. So if you ever want to talk about that at any point as well, obviously I'll forward it over to you to read and stuff
Oh,
beforehand.
lovely. I mean, please do. God, that's such a big thing. I'm glad you
Mm.
squeezed that in there because I'd have said, why didn't you put it in there? So, and I'm sure that'll give people plenty of insight. So please do keep me up to date with the book, and I'll be promoting the podcast with your website as well. So any information on that, I will promote that 100% for you, Lee, because I can imagine that'll give such great insight to other males out there. So again, thank you for your time, and I will be in touch soon. And like I said to the listeners out there, please visit thereisalighttherapy.co.uk if you'd like to know about Lee and the wonderful work he does. So I've been your host, Garen Green, and a big thank you again for Lee joining us on the Green Room podcast. Thank you for your time, and thank you again to you, Lee, and I'll be in touch very soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.